Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special episode of the Small Data Forum podcast. We are honoured and delighted to welcome the seasoned campaigner and founder of the new political True and Fair party, Gina Miller. Gina, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Sam. Lovely to be here and speaking with you today on interesting times.
They are indeed. Yes, that the old, is it a Chinese proverb about may you live in interesting times? They can never be more interesting, can they? You kind of think it can't get more interesting, and suddenly it does.
Well, I don't think it was actually a quote. I think it was a Chinese curse, and I think that's the
Well, yeah, it's definitely come true. Now, Gina, I was tempted to reach out, and thank you very much for making the time to talk. Tempted to reach out purely and simply because, having campaigned on many different issues, I know from having met you and spoken to you before, from having read your book and articles over the years, you are a campaigner. You're somebody who takes campaigning incredibly seriously, and you look at different issues. But I was really interested to see your decision to found a political party. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit about True and Fair, why you set it up, and what you hope to achieve with it.
Yes, I think 30 odd years as a campaigner, along the way, quite a lot of people sort of asked the question in the past, so where next? Are you going to end up in politics? Which party are you going to join? All those things. And I always said, no, not the right time. And actually, it's about that. It's about the issue and the timing. I've always felt it needs to be for the right reasons, not being too opportunistic, but actually about the real core focus of why a party. And for me, having registered last September in 2021, before everything we're seeing in the papers at the moment, it was about the fact that we have a system of politics that's outdated and isn't fit for purpose anymore. And that's actually, my campaigning has been in the city, in the laws, and whatever it is. The common theme for everything I've done is when there is systemic failure, you find that the status quo and those who are in the system tend to be the ones who will come up with the rhetoric, but not really aim at the underlying causes. So I think a lot of what we're seeing at the moment are actually exaggerations of the symptoms rather than the causes. And that systemic failure is based on the system, a political system that we have in the UK, very unusually, that has very few legal checks and balances, and is based on this old naive belief that my word is my bond, and that honorable gentlemen, mainly gentlemen, will behave honorably. And I just think that's not fit for purpose in the age we live in. A modern democracy needs to have checks and balances. I mean, in everyday business, in my world, in all business, we are pushing towards governance. We're pushing towards transparency. We're pushing towards accountability. Where does every pound go? Are you acting in the interest of your consumers? All of these things, to my mind, need to be applied to the political arena. So the reason why the True and Fair Party is, if you like, is based on the accountancy principles of True and Fair. It's time to audit what we have. It is time to look at the bottom line and say, are we as taxpayers getting value for money? Are we investing in sustainable assets? Do we have a functioning system that, as I say, serves the customer, which is voters and people in the job? And I think the answer in all of that, when we look around, is no, we don't. And whilst there is a lot of rhetoric and a lot of nodding towards the right direction, not very many people have come up with solutions that are concrete solutions. And that's what, again, I've always been focused on in my campaigning, is real solutions. What is pragmatic? What's deliverable? What is the best use of our money and our time? I mean, some commentators are talking about a written constitution, for example, being the solution. That may well be in the future, but can you imagine, Sam, how long it would take to actually formulate and decide what would be in a written constitution? I mean, we could be discussing this in another 40, 50 years. So to my mind and those I work with, we are coming up with practical solutions. So True and Fair is proposing a toolbox, if you like, to fix the broken system that we have, our constitutional arrangements in politics and in public office.
So that is, and I think, enormous kind of plaudits for doing that. I mean, some would argue that the purpose of politics is to govern, and political parties are there to win elections. And given the very real constraints that there are and the shortcomings there are in the British electoral system, how are you going to break through and make a real impact on the politics of the UK?
One of our core reforms is electoral reform, because we actually have a system that, again, is so unfair and outdated. We have a representative democracy where you go in and put your X in a box and you're not represented by the person you think you're going to be represented by in Parliament. So that is something that I think we're on the same page as many other campaigners, but the two main parties are not there because it doesn't serve their purpose. They are a duopoly and the system works for them. So why change it? So what we're looking to, that is a core part. We have to change our first past the post system. But at the same time, we have to look at the data. And I'm always interested in the data coming from the world of business, research data. We have to look. And across the three elections from 2010 to 2017, almost half of the UK electorate, that's 49%, didn't vote for the same party. And in 2015 and 2017, the general elections there, we witnessed the highest level of voter volatility in modern times, and that is set to continue. And, if you look at a party like UKIP, love them or hate them, they actually were able to amplify in one issue, which, you could say that constitutional reform is not a simple one issue, but it is an issue that we can amplify to a way that the main parties can't avoid. But our ambition is to stand in elections and in the next general election. But we are in a different time. You could look back to the SDP and say, well, look at the example they had. But, that was 1983. We're now going to be in an election in 2024. So I think the mood has changed. The electorate is more informed, especially through COVID. They've woken up to an awful lot of the things that are wrong. So we are in a different time. Yes, it's a difficult system. I've never done anything that's easy. You could argue, give me a challenge and I'll be up there. But it is about, I think, to me, winning would be to amplify the issues we're talking about so they're taken on by the more traditional parties, and then, of course, standing candidates.
That's really interesting that you mentioned both UKIP and the SDP, and I think there was a fantastic con-trick personally played by the dominant Conservative part of the coalition to say, yes, of course, dear Vice President of Legal Affairs for Facebook, of course you must come in and be Deputy Prime Minister, and of course we'll give you a referendum and we'll do literally nothing to campaign for it. but you brought them up first, so I'll ask you the question. But which inspires you more? I'm old enough to remember that the SDP were 50% in the polls before the Falklands, and had it not been for the Falklands, then they would have been elected probably with a landslide. But which inspires you more? The fact that they were able to win lots of by-elections in the early 80s and so on, that the SDP, does that inspire you more, or does... Well, no one. The Office of National Statistics tells us that nobody is called Nigel anymore, but I can't think what the reason might be. But is it UKIP and the Brexit Party, or is it the SDP, or is it neither of those that give you inspiration to think that you could succeed here?
I think I'm always looking at what other people have done, and I try and interrogate what they've done. I think the SCPs. Compared, we didn't mention the other one, which was Change UK, but you look at what SCP did. As you say, Falklands came along, and it'd be really interesting to see if the Ukraine, what happens there, and I guess if that changes the fortunes of the Conservative Party as we stand today. But the SCP were very different in that they were a bottom up. They understood getting out there and that's what we're doing. We've hit the ground running. I've already been up to Manchester, Bury. Tomorrow I'm off to Leeds, Bradford. We're already building on the ground. But what I would say about UKIP and Brexit and Nigel is that the tools they had were the modern tools. So one is the message and getting the message out there. And of course, we're going to use the most modern tools available to us to then amplify those messages. So you've got to get the right messages, motivate the grassroots, but then it's about amplifying it. And they did that incredibly well. And I think they were probably more sophisticated in the way they did it. So we will obviously use the most advanced tools available to us. But I think the other thing that UKIP and the Brexit Party, or UKIP stroke Brexit Party, again, I'm very capable of being unemotional about these things and looking at the data and looking under it, is that they understood. I mean, I originally came from a marketing background. They understood targeting. They understood changing the message for the audience, and they understood the building the avatars for the people who are going to receive their messages online. And that's something we've looked very carefully at, and we would definitely be doing. I mean, we wouldn't do it in the same way of exploiting the people and playing on their, if you like, on their frailties, but we would try to appeal to their heads and hearts. And that's what they did. They really understood how to appeal to heads and hearts.
Well, I mean, it's music to the ears of the Small Data Forum to hear about a political party using data in an honourable way. And I've just finished, and I'm just literally the day that we speak, putting into production a new book all about the role of asking questions. And one of the areas that I've looked at clearly is the political landscape that's dominated over the last, well, let's say at least 10 years. But looking at those targeted ads, looking at the 76 million Turkish citizens are about to join. The UK suddenly has borders with Syria and Iraq, thanks to Turkey, which actually is not about to join, Dominic. I have to say,
but I've been working campaigning. My last sort of 3-4 years have been on online regulations, so both in the UK and internationally. And I do think one of the things that, on the offline world, when you're advertising, you have regulators and things you certainly can't do. But online, it is a bit of a cowboy land, and we do have to have regulation there. But what is even worse, I think, for a threat to democracy in the digital space is the fact that you have people who are being targeted in algorithms that are confirming their biases and confirming. So rather than being, having to go out there and feel, well, am I the only person, and, feeling that maybe not everyone thinks like you. When you go online, you suddenly think everyone thinks like you, because that's the way the algorithms work. And I think that is something we have to really tackle. And I don't think the legislation is doing that enough. So, I mean, that's a whole different conversation. But
of course,
but I think the damage the digital arena can do to democracies around the world is something we're going to have a very, very big conversation about.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. The Guardian's former technology editor Charles Arthur wrote a very good book published last year, Social Warming, the analogy of global warming with, you only need to change people's attitudes a little bit, but you change a lot of people's attitudes a little bit. The impacts can be really very, very profound. So no, I'm completely with you there. Going back to the strategy. I mean, you talked about success would be raising your issues, getting them into the agenda of the mainstream parties. I mean, are you going to, when it comes round to either local or indeed national elections, will your strategy be to field candidates across the board? Will you focus on marginal seats? Is it the red or blue wall? Are you going to take Caroline Lucas and the green approach to target particular seats? I mean, maybe it's too soon to say. Maybe there'll be a variety of strategies.
It is too early, and like any good general, you wait to see the lie of the land before you launch your attacks. And I think at the moment where we are, the polls are emotionally driven. They're being people are responding emotively to what they're seeing in Partygate and them and us and what's happened with the lockdown rules. So I think the polls are misleading right now. So we will wait to see. But that said, I'm also very realistic about the funding it takes to launch a party and run campaigns in lots of seats. So we're registered in England and Wales on purpose, because I can see that straight away is where we can realistically field candidates. And we will look very carefully. We'll work with the best pollers and pollsters we can to look at the data, listening polls as well as traditional methods, so that we can really find out where and when and how we land. There's no point me going to areas where we'll split the vote, because our aim is to ensure there's not a Tory government. And secondly, where we actually have a chance. There's no point us going to field a candidate in a seat where we helicopter in. Because the other thing is, I would feel local. I'm a great believer in local candidates. I don't think we helicopter people in. People have to understand local issues, be trusted by the local electorate. And it's something I feel very strongly about. So we wouldn't just be helicoptering famous celebrities.
But presumably, you yourself will be standing in what you believe to be a winnable seat.
I will stand in a local seat. I will stand in a seat more local to me than one sort of say where I think it's just about winning. But actually, there's quite a few in London, so that's not proving to be an issue at the moment. I actually almost have my choice. So, but yes, I will be standing. But we have some way to go, and there are some dark arts, I think, that will still be playing it out in some of the advertising. And I think, Sam, what's going to happen is that the Tory party are a survivalist animal. They will do whatever it takes to survive and to win, or not even to survive, but to win. And I am mindful, or I do believe there'll be some faux wars that are created. And it's how do we then navigate and don't fall into the traps, if you like, of those faux wars. And also try and get our message home that, we are there to change the system, lend us our vote, not almost for their, you can then revert to whoever you believe. But, right now it's about fixing the system.
I absolutely, completely get that, and it's very, very encouraging to hear, your application, not of the dark arts, but your application of data and analytics. Because as you say, both in marketing, but particularly in finance, very strongly the role of getting genuine insight from data. Do you have either armies of interns or sophisticated algorithms that are going to help you to target supporters, donors, members, voters, and so on? Are you? Clearly, when you get closer to an election, you're going to want to be gearing that up. But is it people? Is it people plus algorithms? Is it?
It's going to be both. You've got to do both. You've got to get people on the street. You've got to get people door knocking and seeing people and listening to them. Because the problem with a lot of the polls, and we've seen this in the past, is that they're slightly skewed because it's people, they sort of react differently in polls, and this anyway, Sam, but also many of the polls poll voters. And it's the people, one of the things we've picked up before we launched, and also now, there is the trend that's really growing is the number of people who are saying they're not going to vote. And that's at the moment, we believe, sitting at sort of the high 20s, which is huge. That's actually a real indictment of people feeling that they don't trust any politician. That's one of the things I say to all the sort of more traditional politicians and parties is, you're saying that all of this is about the Conservatives and Boris Johnson. It's not. What we're listening and hearing from our campaigning and our work is that people are not trusting any politicians. It really is this view that it's them and us. And that's very, very damaging for our democracy. It's very damaging for trust in politics. And it's very damaging for how we then ask people to behave in future, if there is any sort of future, crises, environmental, pandemic, whatever the crises are. But this is something. So I think it's about restoring trust in all politics and across the board. And that means that we have to fix the system. But also, I think we have to listen to those who say they won't vote. Because, if that is a high number, I do worry about what the results will be at the next general election. Over the EU referendum had 70% of the eligible voters voting, that was almost a high watermark. General, I think was Blair's last electoral victory in 2005. That was sort of in the mid-high 50s, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah. But that's very interesting. So when you say that people are not voting, or those that say they're not going to vote are now in the high 20s, that is polling higher than it usually does.
Yes, it is, and it's a trend that's continuing. So that's when we talk to people, I go around the country, what they're saying is, we have no one to vote for, because normally they vote against someone. That is a British way. British people tend to vote against rather than for. Here they're saying we don't want to vote for anyone. We want to vote. We actually don't believe in any of them. So, what is it? So my view is, we can't just sit back and hope that someone will pop up and will give them the idea that they need to vote. So I need to actually harness people's discontent, dismay, disillusionment, because those are all these are all the things we're hearing, and saying, look, we can change things for the better. And my other message is, so you sit on the sidelines while this chaos is unfolding, and and you're going to leave it to future generations to clear up that mess. We have to be responsible for what's going on. Do you really want to burden? I call them the burden generations, because I think they will be, because of what's going on, because the ripple effect as well of what I'm talking about systemic change. And again, going back to the worlds of business and academia and social organizations or organizational cultures, are that when you put in checks and balances and when you put in better governance, it does affect the culture of organizations. And you tend to get better people coming into the organization because they're attracted by it. And this is something, again, we have a cultural vacuum in politics where people, you'd argue the good people are not attracted to it because there isn't enough checks and balances or processes for bullying, for whistleblowing. All these things need to be fixed, because I think the ripple effect of fixing the machinery of government is the input and outputs will be better, both in terms of policy making, but also culturally in the people that we get into politics.
That's fair. That's a really interesting perspective. You said earlier that your objective is for not a Tory government.
Yes.
So it's anyone but well, I mean, candidly,
not this Tory government.
Yeah. But I mean, candidly, I mean, despite all of the pivots and the employment of GB News, Guito Harry, and the rest of it, and the employment of Steve Barclay, who is not only an MP but a minister as chief of staff, it seems to be panic, despite all the spin that says Johnson is making a conscious choice to change his team when actually they're all resigning. Nevertheless, I don't. I mean, my sense is, and I may well be very, very wrong, my sense is that you would not be fighting a Tory government led by Johnson at the next election.
Yes, no. I actually don't think after the May elections. That's why, again, I think for us, we won't be fighting these May elections. We've only launched a few weeks ago. I've done an M&A going back to the business environment, is that we've had another party fold into us, Renew, which is fantastic. I'm talking to other groups. So, the idea is that we are growing. And I'm not intending to wake up our enemy too soon, but as the saying goes. We will carry on doing what we're doing, very focused, and we have a very strategic approach to what we're doing. But we need to know who it is we're fighting. And I feel that the way things are going, I could be completely wrong as well, but my political antennae tells me that after the May elections, which I don't think things won't die down, will not go well. People are not going to forgive the fact that their loved ones died, didn't get to say goodbye. This is not just about people being angry and upset. This is about people being heartbroken and the tragedy, the depth of the tragedy that people have had to endure will not just sweep away or wash away. So I think the elections will be a wake-up call for Conservatives, which means that Johnson will go. It will be very interesting if he goes, because a lot of the people who are in the cabinet and who are around him are there because of Johnson, and they're seen as his cabinet and his team. So a new leader presumably will want his or her, I think it may well be a her, team. So, we could see a completely different government. And what I think will be very interesting for that particular leader is the question of, do they need a new mandate? So do they stand on the old mandate, or do they then fight a new mandate? So I think we have a lot of uncertainty coming down the line for the rest of 2022, I'm afraid. I think, and he was always lampooned. I mean, I know he was lampooned with good reason. Rumsfeld was always lampooned for the unknown unknowns, but yes.
But the the Johari matrix and the unknown unknowns is what drives strategy in the US military and in NASA. So I think unknown unknowns. Now, listen, I want to round out. We're speaking, and we'll be publishing very soon, but we're speaking in the week in which one could draw the line between David Lammy and Keir Starmer being surrounded by a baying mob on the Monday night of the week that we're speaking, and Johnson with his throwaway quip about Starmer as head of the as head of when he was
public prosecutor.
Public prosecutor. Thank you very much. And the throwaway quip from Johnson about Savile. What's your? He was apparently very well advised not to.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say to you, Sam. It wasn't a throwaway quip. It was a deliberate strategy of his, because he was advised by from what I understand, near all his advisors that this is not, it was incorrect, and B, it would be, it was something you shouldn't go near because it's so distasteful. So on all levels, I think he was advised not to, but it shows the character of the man, where he doesn't listen to advice, but also he thinks this is some sort of a game. Game, that attitude has severe consequences. And it is, he's already, people within his party and without his party say it's a Trumpian playbook. And I think that is very concerning, because even though the people outside who were demonstrating had been there for some time, the fact that they included that rhetoric and that comment shows that they were listening, and that they feel that they've been enabled by his comments to act in a particular way and to take things to extremes. So as a leader, you have to be careful of weaponizing language, and what you say has consequences. And he does not seem to adhere to those sort of those responsibilities of office. We're already in a place where MPs of all parties have to put up with a huge amount of abuse. I think every single female MP I've spoken to, and many male, but mainly the female MPs I've spoken to over the last 3-4 years, now think and take it as read that every day they're going to get a death threat or a rape threat or something. I mean, it's now this is unbelievable that we now, or even myself, I find myself reading them and thinking, oh yeah, of course. And when did we get to the place where we think this is an acceptable price to pay for standing up and exercising your civic duty? And the only way I believe that will change is for all politicians to behave differently. I mean, my own case, I'd say, when I won the second case, my prorogation case, and I watched the next day in Parliament, I was so disgusted. I thought, why have I put myself, my money, my resources, my safety, my family up for this, to prove a constitutional point, to have them behave like, it was like a fish market. Honestly, it was some dystopian sort of fish market that they all decided that this is what they would do, having been told that they can't close down our representatives in Parliament. And I think the way Parliament, one of the things I really want to reform is the way Parliament conducts itself. We have to have more rules about what can be said, how it can be said. The Speaker of the House should be a trained independent individual. All these things, you look at it, the more you look into it, the more you realize how dysfunctional the system is.
It all clearly comes down to good governance, and there is no decent governance. I mean, one other question on the Johnson Savile Starmer affair. I mean, I could well be wrong about this, but my sense is that now that has been tossed out there, now it is being used as legitimate abuse that is then reported and reported and reported because it's so shocking, but it's reported. I wonder whether I don't know whether Starmer stood a chance before, but he appears now to be fatally tainted with an untruth in exactly the same way as you say that Trump was doing. No, you don't think so?
No, I do think so. I do worry about this because unfortunately untruths stick, and I'm a living proof of that. So there's lots of things that have been said about me that are not true. So I do know, and I think this is part of the problem. The media have a very difficult job, because do they report and give oxygen to what happens because then it sticks, or do they not report it or not so prominently, and then they can be accused of not taking it too seriously? It's a really difficult dilemma for the media in this. As
so often, the wisdom of Jonathan Swift that falsehood flies and truth comes limping after. Gina,
I will tell you one thing, Sam, is that we can despair and think, we are in the worst times ever. But I would take you back to a moment of hope that, back in 1830s, when you had a book by Anthony Trollope, and Anthony Trollope, who wrote, we live in the most dishonest times where, they came out of it, so will we. But we will only come out of it if I think people realize that you actually do have to speak up. You can't leave it for somebody else to provide the solutions. We actually have to become active citizens and exercise our civic duty.
What a data-driven ray of hope you bring to us. Gina, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us on Small Data Forum Podcast. We'll be putting this out at the beginning of next week, I think. So thank you so much for your time. I feel energized and refreshed having spoken to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks a lot.